In Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, the Message paraphrases the words of Jesus this way. Jesus asks, "Are you tired?" Jesus is asking, "Are you tired?" A little bit. Labor Day weekend, we feel it, more aware of it. Are you tired? Are you worn out? I don't know if there's ever been a time in history where this question can feel more rhetorical. Like, yeah, I'm pretty tired, pretty worn out. I was reading a survey that was done in Business Week magazine where they wanted to find out where people on the job, when they're asked, "How are you?" what's the number one answer to that question? And once you get past kind of this generic non-answer of like, okay, fine, good, by far, the number one answer to the question, "How are you?" is, "I'm tired. I'm tired." Or some variation of that, "I'm busy." Saying I'm busy is kind of like saying I'm tired or getting ready to be tired. How are you? I'm so busy. How are you? I'm crazy busy. And we have different ways of saying that. I'm slammed, I'm buried, I'm catching up, I'm tied up. And my favorite was when I was at Kroger. It was a busy day there. I'm walking out, getting ready to pay. The checker is clearly frazzled. And I said to her, "How are you?" And she said, "I just can't." Okay, all right. Like she just can't even answer the question. That's how busy, that's how tired she is. And so we live in this world where we can feel that way oftentimes, but instead of me asking if you're tired, I wanna give you some statements and you see if these are true in your life. And we're gonna use these as kind of a way to gauge what pace you're living your life at, okay? So I'll read it. If it's true, you raise your hand. Number one, I've cut through a gas station to avoid stopping at a red light. Raise your hand. Yeah, like I'm not showing you how to raise your hand. I'm raising my hand with you. I've done that. Number two, I don't like to take vacations where there isn't always something to do. You like to stay busy on your vacations. You get restless if you just sit around. Number three, I frequently look at my phone for no apparent reason. Like you're just looking at it because you gotta have something to do. Number four, people who talk slowly irritate me. Like every word is a sentence. Just say it. Just say what you want to say. Number five, I often switch lines because I think the one I'm in is too slow. Yeah? Number six, I believe God makes whatever line I'm in the slowest. Like, I don't know a lot about God, but I know He does that. Whatever line I'm in is gonna be the slowest line. Number seven, when I go to sleep, my mind often rehearses all the things I haven't gotten done that day or all the things I have to do tomorrow. A lot of us fall asleep that way. Eight, I have difficulty finding time for things like paying bills or going to the doctor or the dentist. Nine, I feel compelled to leave church early to beat the parking lot rush. You don't have to raise your hand on this one. Like we know who you are, right? We know who you are, and so does God. So we talk about feeling tired or just feeling busy, but in this series we've been addressing our emotions, and specifically how can we handle our emotions in a way that's biblically mature, spiritually mature. And when I talk about being tired or worn out, there's a sense in which that doesn't seem like an emotion. But what do we know about being tired? We know that the feeling of being exhausted, of always being busy, it makes us vulnerable to all these other emotions that we really want to be free from. And there's all kinds of studies that demonstrate this, that the busier you are, the more tired you are, the more you are likely to experience things like depression and anxiety and irritability. And so what we find is that being tired is kind of a gateway to all these emotions that many of us are struggling with. And so in this series, we've gone through Psalms, just pulling out different Psalms. David was a great warrior, a great king. He was an emotional man, and he teaches us to process emotions by bringing us along and letting us kind of go on that journey with him. And so the Psalms, as we've said, are not necessarily prescriptive in nature. David doesn't go through and say, here's 5 things that you need to do to deal with how you're feeling. Instead, we're just invited along on his journey to get to feel how he feels. And so what I want to do in the next few minutes is talk about the most famous of all the Psalms, Psalm 23. Really, we're just going to focus on the first few verses because I think if we understand the first few verses, really just the first few words, it unlocks the rest of the psalm. And so here's what David says, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack what? I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. Can we do this? Let's all just take a deep breath. Let's read this again. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters, and he refreshes my soul. David says, the Lord is my shepherd. If the Lord is his shepherd, then what does that make David? It makes David a sheep. And that's not an especially flattering animal. It's not an impressive creature because a sheep is completely dependent upon the shepherd. Exactly. And one of the reasons we struggle with finding this rhythm of rest in our lives is that we confuse this relationship. We start to live like we're the shepherd rather than the sheep. We start to live like it all depends on me. And I gotta protect myself, and I gotta provide for myself, and I gotta make it happen for me. And when I live like I'm the shepherd instead of the sheep, I'm gonna put a lot of pressure on me that I was never meant to carry, and it makes it incredibly difficult to rest if you're putting all that weight on yourself. So David starts off by saying, I'm not the shepherd, I'm the sheep. And by saying you're the sheep, you are humbling yourself. You are declaring that you are in a state of dependence. You're saying, I can't take care of myself by myself. I need God's help. And I trust him to help me. And because I trust him to help me, I lack for nothing. I can rest. In the series, we've used different vehicles to help us understand different emotions because we've said that every emotion has the power to move us in a certain direction. That emotions aren't necessarily good or bad in and of themselves. Even though many of us were taught there's a way you should feel and a way you shouldn't feel, what we see in the Bible is that an emotion has the power, the potential to either move us away from God and what God would want for our lives or to move us towards God and to have a better understanding of who he wants us to be and what he wants for our lives. So as I was thinking of a vehicle to represent this topic today, I was reminded of the 2004 Mazda 3 that my intern got in 2004. It was his first car, bought a brand new Mazda 3, and he couldn't have been more excited about having this vehicle. Got it at the beginning of the year. You fast forward to the end of the year, and that car, it was shot. Well, it's not because he got in an accident. He didn't wreck the car. You know what he did? He drove 24,000 miles and never changed the oil. That's what he did. 24,000 miles, just kept going. Well, you're supposed to stop every 3,000 miles. I mean, it takes 10 minutes and, $40, but you're supposed to stop and get the oil changed every 3,000 miles. And he didn't do that. I'm not sure why. I think he just wasn't used to maintenance in a car. I hadn't owned a car before. Maybe it was because he was really busy. He was an incredibly driven guy, very smart, brilliant guy. Sometimes that makes it harder to do some of those things, to stop for 10 minutes and get the oil changed. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe he thought that little warning light on the dashboard was like it's a suggestion. Yeah, if you want to do it. If it's not a good time, don't do it now. Just keep driving. But if you've got nothing else to do today, you might do this. Maybe he thought that's what that warning light was, so he just kept going. Maybe he thought, I'm gonna do it, but today's not I'll do it tomorrow. And then he thought, I'll do it tomorrow. And then he thought, I'll do it tomorrow. And 24,000 miles later, if you ever wonder, how far can you actually go? Like, what's the number? 24,000 miles. That's the number. engine locks up. He had to replace the engine for $6,500. That's what it cost him. He could have taken 10 minutes, $40, changed the oil along the way. It was never a good day to do it. It was never a convenient time, but if he would have taken that time to stop driving, it would have been a lot less expensive, would have been a lot less time consuming. And there's a sense in which we think we can violate the manufacturer's instructions and get away with it. Like, yeah, maybe that's what everybody else should do, but it's just not a good time for me right now. I'm just gonna keep going and keep driving. And so what you find in Scripture is God gives us this rhythm for life. He gives us, as the manufacturer, some instructions on how we take care of our bodies and our souls and our relationships. And part of that rhythm is rest. A certain kind of rest that reconnects us to God and it replenishes us. And so you see this from the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1. God is creating the world. And sometime just read through the creation account out loud. Because what you'll find is it's poetic. There's this rhythm to it. There's a beat to it if you read it out loud. And there's two lines that keep showing up as God creates the world, and these two lines kind of work as a refrain, what you might hear in a song or in a poem. Here are the two lines. God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning. So after the third day, God pauses and he appreciates. God sees that it's good. And then it's evening and morning, and then on the fourth day, he works again. At the end of the fourth day, God saw that it was good, and it was evening and it was morning. And so there's this rhythm to it. And then you get to the end of the creation account, and in Genesis chapter 2, verse 3, it says, God rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So on the seventh day, he rests. And this is how Scripture begins, with this rhythm. You go then to Exodus, where you have the law, and what God does is he takes this rhythm and he makes it required for his people. And he asks the people, actually commands the people to observe this same rhythm in their lives. Why? Because he's the manufacturer. He knows how we work. He knows how things are gonna go best for us, and so he requires this rhythm. And so for his people, there was a daily rhythm where in the morning and in the evening and at meal times, they were to pause, take a breath, say this prayer, reflect on who God is, reflect on what God has done, look around and see that it's good. And they had a weekly rhythm where there was a Sabbath where they would rest from all of their work. Well, what did they do on the Sabbath? Nothing. It wasn't about doing on the Sabbath, it was about being. And then there was yearly rhythms that God built into the calendar where he would have these feasts and these celebrations for the people where they would take a break from their work, they would gather together in community, and they would celebrate how God had rescued them, how God had saved them in the past. And so he built this rhythm into creation, and he makes it required for his people because he knows that our lives were meant to live with this rhythm. And we can violate the rhythm, but it catches up to us. This might not surprise you, but I am rhythmically challenged. Like I'm not necessarily somebody who has a lot of rhythm. So this past summer, my oldest daughter got married, and when it was time for the father-daughter dance, I did something a little bit different than what you might typically see at a wedding father-daughter dance. I invited all the fathers and daughters to come out there on the dance floor with us. So my daughter and I danced for like 20 seconds, then I had the DJ say, hey, all the dads and daughters come out and join Kyle and his daughter on the dance floor. Now, afterwards, people were like, that was a really sweet moment. They said to me, hey, that was really humble of you to share that moment with all the fathers and daughters. I appreciated the compliment. I didn't tell them this at the time, but I didn't care about the other fathers and daughters. I just wanted them to keep the other people from seeing my lack of rhythm. I just didn't want anybody to see me dance. I'm like, how can I hide? I'm on the middle of the dance floor. I know I'll surround myself with other dads who also are rhythmically challenged, right? That way, nobody notices, nobody will pay attention to the fact that I can't dance. The night before, I was up YouTubing how to dance. That is not good. I was thinking about faking an injury, and I can't do it, babe. I want to be out there with you. Finally, I just thought, I'll surround myself with other people. Maybe nobody will notice. I think this is kind of what's happened with us in our lives. We don't have much rhythm, but we get lost in the crowd of people who don't have much rhythm. And we live in a world where there's not much rhythm. Nobody seems to notice. We don't even realize it ourselves. We just are living at this pace, doing what everybody else does. We don't have any evenings at home as a family. We can't find time to go to church maybe more than one weekend a month because we got kids' activities and we have plans for the weekend. We don't have time, but neither does anybody else. And so we just kind of get lost in that crowd. And I don't have much rhythm on the dance floor or off the dance floor. Like if you look at my life, you wouldn't say, that is a well-choreographed dance. I would look instead to you kind of like, a guy who's caught up in some invisible spider web and you can't see the spider web, but he's just flailing around. It's more frantic. And I think that's true for a lot of us. I mean, even this week, on Friday, I was leaving the house. It's my day off. Friday's my day off. I was leaving the house to go to the office to write this sermon. And as I'm leaving the house, my wife says to me, hey, you know, don't you, that you're going to the office on your day off to write a sermon about taking a day off, right? Just want to make sure you know that. Like that's what you're doing. You're taking your day off to write a sermon about taking a day off. And I didn't really say anything. I drove into the office and in my mind, I don't know if you ever do this, like I'm in the car, I'm saying what I wish I had the courage maybe to say in response, like in that moment, like justifying myself. It's a busy season right now. There's just a lot going on right now. I'm just trying to be obedient with what God's called me to do. But what am I really doing? What I'm doing is I'm saying, and this is true theoretically. I think this is important for everyone else, but just not a good time for me. I think this is what we do with teachings like this. I think this matters. I agree with it in spirit, but my calendar this week, just not gonna work out for me. It's important that everybody else live this way, but I can get away with it. I'll get my oil changed later. And we go, and we go. And some of you have learned the hard way, as have I, that this pace is not sustainable. That things start to get locked up. That you'll pay a price for this physically. Like even if emotionally you can handle this kind of pace, your body just reaches a point where it says, I'm out. Or relationally, you've felt the effects of living with this kind of rhythm in your life because you're not taking the time you need to connect to the people who love you. You're more irritable with them. You're running so far ahead of them that they're much further behind than you realize. It affects me spiritually. That if I'm not resting and taking time to connect with God, I'm much more vulnerable to temptation. It's much more difficult for me to be in tune with what His will is for my life. And you can either take some time to pause and appreciate each day and the Sabbath day of rest. You can either take some time to get your oil changed or it catches up with you. God didn't design us to live at this kind of pace. And so you feel like it's working. You feel like your strategy of just going and going and going is working. You're seeing some fruits from all that work you've put in. And then one day the engine locks up. What happened? You didn't see it coming. Neither did anybody else. God did. Because He knows how He has made you. And He just hasn't made us to live life at this kind of pace. And so when I live with this rhythm of rest, it resets us physically, it renews us emotionally, it restores us relationally with the people around us. But the second thing I would say is that living with this kind of rhythm of rest, it demonstrates that our faith is real. It shows that we really do believe that God has the power and the strength, that we really do believe what he has promised to be true. It teaches us to depend on him. It teaches us to make his will a priority for our lives.